The last disorder that you need to be able to explain and discuss treatments for is OCD. Now, OCD is made up of both a cognitive and a behavioural component. So the cognitive aspect of it involves persistently intrusive thoughts, and the behavioural component of it involves the repetitive behaviours. Now, you need to be able to explain this using the biological approach. So this is thinking about physical changes and physical differences within the body that could cause OCD. The first explanation we're going to look at is the genetic explanation, and it is thought that OCD is what we term polygenic. Now, this means that there's not just one gene that causes it, but a multiple of various different genes could all contribute to the symptoms of OCD. And it's even been suggested that all these different genes could explain why we get several different presentations of OCD. For example, why some people may have obsessive thoughts over cleanliness, other people might show behaviours such as hoarding. Now, genes come in various different forms, and these are called alleles. Now, when we're talking about genetic explanations, it's important that we don't use the terminology to say that people have a gene for something. So our genetic code is very similar across all people, but what you will find is different among different people is that we have different forms of a particular gene or different alleles of a gene, and that's what makes us unique. So what researchers have done is they've identified various candidate genes which, in the right form or with the right allele, could give somebody a genetic predisposition to OCD. Now, two of the most important genes that they've highlighted are the COMT or the COMT gene and the SIRT gene. Now, the COMT gene regulates the production of dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter, and the SIRT gene regulates the transport of serotonin, another neurotransmitter. And we're going to look at how increases and decreases in the various levels of these neurotransmitters could be associated with OCD a little bit later in the screencast. Now, when we're thinking about genetic explanations, it's very important that we don't state that having a gene for OCD or having one form of a gene, of the COMT gene or the SIRT gene, is definitely going to lead to symptoms of OCD, because that's not how it works. We need to consider the idea of a diathesis-stress model, which is where genetics interact with the environment to give a particular outcome. So if we think first of all on this graph, if we look at the resilient individual, now in this case a resilient individual is somebody who doesn't have any forms of the genes that might cause OCD. Now, whether they experience positive or negative environments or experiences, they have a positive outcome, and in this case a positive outcome means that they're free of OCD. If we look at the vulnerable individual, in comparison to this, so a vulnerable individual would be somebody who does have a genetic predisposition to OCD. If they're in a negative environment, then they're likely to show a negative outcome, in this case symptoms of OCD. But those people with the same genes who are in a positive environment have a positive outcome, and in this case they're OCD free. So we don't want to talk about somebody having a gene which causes OCD, but we do want to use the terminology to say that an individual may have a gene which predisposes them or gives them a genetic predisposition to developing OCD. Neural explanations are the other explanations you need to know when it comes to OCD, and the first one is looking at neurotransmitter levels. If you can't remember what a neurotransmitter is, go back and have a look at the biopsychology screencast. It is important that you know this. And the two neurotransmitters implicated in OCD are serotonin and dopamine, as we looked at when we looked at the genetic explanations. Now, it's currently thought that lower levels of serotonin and higher levels of dopamine are associated with OCD. Now, this does link to the genetic explanation, but the exact mechanisms as to why high or low levels of these neurotransmitters can cause OCD aren't fully known. The second neural explanation involves neural circuitry, and this involves problems with specific brain areas. The brain area that we're most interested in is the basal ganglia, which is this pink section in the middle of the brain here. Now, normally, in a normal healthy brain, the orbitofrontal cortex, which is labelled just here, will send signals of worry to the thalamus, and the caudate nucleus will generally suppress those worries if they are things which are small and insignificant and that we don't need to generally worry about. Now, it's thought that in people who have OCD, instead of suppressing those worries, when the orbitofrontal cortex alerts the thalamus, the caudate nucleus doesn't respond to suppress it, and so it creates this worry circuit that is constantly spinning around somebody's head, causing those intrusive thoughts and those constant worries and those cognitions. So you can have a look at both of those explanations in more detail in the pre-reading, and before you come into your lesson, make sure you can explain very broadly how genes can impact the development of OCD and give 2 examples of the specific genes that are linked to OCD. Explain how neurotransmitter levels are linked to OCD, and also explain how neural circuitry can be linked to OCD development.